Ray, why don't you start off? You have always been interested in investing, but then in 1971, you were a clerk at the exchange. Nixon goes on TV on Sunday. Tell us what happened then and what you learned.
Okay, well, I'm clerking on the floor of the exchange, 1971. President Nixon announces to the world that the United States is defaulting on its obligation to take that paper that they have, which was like checks in a checkbook, and give them the gold.
Close the gold window.
Close the gold window. So he defaulted on the obligation to pay the money because the gold was running down. They didn't have enough, and it was like a bank run. So I walk onto the exchange floor expecting...
You went early because you thought...
Yeah. I expect that there's going to be a chaos and things would be bad. And the stock market went up the most in decades. And I didn't understand it. And that's because that was the first time a devaluation happened. I never went through one of those. And I studied history, and I found the exact same thing happened on March 5th, 1933, except it was with Roosevelt and a radio rather than a TV. And the exact same thing. And the stock market went up a lot. And so what I learned, and I had this repeatedly in my life, that things that surprised me often surprised me because they didn't happen in my lifetime, but they happened many times in history. So for example, by studying that the 1920s to the 1945 period, I saw that I understood the nature of the 2008 financial crisis when we anticipated the 2008 financial crisis, because what happens when you have a lot of debt and interest rates at zero? How does that work? And that dynamic is what happened in 2008. And so it's very much emphasized in my mind how in order to understand things that never happened in my lifetime, I have to study history. And there were three major things. There are three major things that are now happening in our lifetime that didn't happen other than you'd have to go back in history. Those three things are we're producing an enormous amount of debt, particularly government debt, but a lot of debt, and monetizing that in amounts that you would have to go back to the 1930 to 45 period. Number two, we have a level of internal conflict. The largest wealth gaps since back then, the largest internal conflict and populism of the left and the right in our country and at war. And a populist is an individual who will not accept losing. They'll win at all costs. So that dynamic is new. You have to go back really to the 30s around the world or before. And the third is the great power conflict. In other words, the rise of a great power in the form of China that is a comparable power in the world, and that dynamic. So in order to see that, I needed to then study the past 500 years of history. Now, I know people think it's odd because here I am. I'm just trying to make money in the markets. I'm a practical guy dealing with that. But we would not understand that. And the picture of the world is a very different picture than we have grown used to because of the nature of these longer term cycles.
So you studied 10 empires, 4 in particular relevance to us: the Dutch, the British, the US, and China. And you have come to the conclusion that there are these empires are great powers, go through cycles, and as you say, even though times and circumstances have changed, the cycles don't. And be prepared, even though it has not happened in your lifetime, big disruptive things can happen.
Well, I think it's not adequate to just assume that because it happened in the past that it's going to happen, or the cycles. What the cycles do is they shine light on the cause-effect relationship. So let's take a basic dynamic. If you have a financial crisis, and we can get into what causes it, at the same time as you have large wealth gaps and therefore big disagreements, you are likely to have populism. And if you have those two things coming together, it's an explosive combination. It was said in the earlier session, for example, capitalism. What about capitalism? It's becoming unpopular. Now imagine a bad situation with capitalism, and that's played out through history for good reasons. If you combine that with the external conflict, the war, the external war. When I say war, it is a reality that there are measures of health in an economy's rising and declining. And so when you have that geopolitical conflict and you put that on top, you have a dangerous set of circumstances. In doing that examination of those periods, I found also that there were two other big factors that mattered. Those were, interestingly, acts of nature, droughts, floods, and pandemics, killed more people and toppled more of the civilizations than the first three I mentioned.
Then inventiveness.
And then number 5 is inventiveness, which then takes technology, the technology. So when I look at these, all of these 5 coming together, I think we're going to go through, like, it'll be almost like a time warp that we're going to go through, that over the next 5 to 10 years, the world is going to be very, very different than it is today.